because you learn from your mistakes. And don't judge anything by a cover, because there would have been, you'd assume, oh, someone who's on the streets maybe a bit scruffy, or maybe doesn't look too great, but we saw people with suits on, and you know, they had the normal life before, but something happens in their lives and their life has changed and they're on the street. So and I think this service taught us that God needs to be in these places. These people are dying for someone to give them love and appreciation. It's not even going out and giving them a Bible. It's not even going out and just like giving them an Agbeya to read. That's not going to bring them to God. But it's about loving them and not judging them, even if they are the worst of the worst. Like, what is it in Rick Warren's book? He even says, don't go to non-believers and expect them to behave as believers. Like, you know, we have this idea of, well, you must, like, even if you invite people to your church, they must behave in a certain way. Like, why? They don't know God. Let them know God, and God will then change them. You know, it's not we're going to go and change people, or, you know, but so yeah, that took a long lesson. So like, even if you meet people who are drug addicts, or, you know, even aggressive people, like, you know, what are you going to do to, like, you're not no righteous, like, you know, they just need to have God in their lives, and that's what's going to transform them. Not, we're sinners too, so yeah, I would maybe do something like that. It's really good experience.
We did a mission trip to India like a year and a half ago, about 10 people from our church. We went and volunteered in the Mother Teresa houses in Calcutta. And the first day of we had like a 1.5 hour orientation thing where the nuns told us a little bit about the different houses and assigned us to different houses. But the only instruction that they gave us going into it was, these aren't houses for preaching. These are houses for being an example and just giving love to the people who come in, and that's it. And we got to the houses, and even like the nuns who worked in each individual house for the sick were the same way. There was no, like, if someone asked a question, like, then you like enter into conversation with them, but it was just a place purely to love the people who came in and needed it, and that was it.
I think the majority of the time that's what it really is, but we kind of overlap it with things that we need to, like, a kind of checklist that needs to happen before someone, you know, gets to know God. But like you saw in that video, you know, sometimes Jesus didn't have to say anything, and that was enough for people, you know, for their lives to change. So
I think that's something that said, like, that sometimes we take in from God but we don't give out. Did you say that? I think. And I think that there's an epidemic of Christians that's like feeding ourselves spiritually and reading every new spiritual book that comes out and having all the sermons on DVDs, but not really affecting anybody else's life. And I'm not just talking about preaching, like Rhonda's saying, like feeding the hungry, and I think God wants us to step way out of our comfort zones and start to change the world. Because otherwise, what's the benefit of being a Christian? That's what people will say. Say you're just as nice as anybody else is not really, maybe you smile a bit more, and you say God bless you, but there's not much difference between you and anyone else.
Paula says, what is your benefit? Everyone heard that? Yeah. What is your benefit?
And you should dream big. Don't be afraid of, oh, we don't have money to do it, I don't have the skills, I don't know what to do, and because God, like, He gives you the dream and He equips you to do it.
There's those two verses that there's the one verse, to those much has been given, much is expected. And then there was a verse that was in one of the readings, or actually I think it was in the fraction, that you are a royal priesthood, a chosen generation. I forget the last part, but I think, I don't know sometimes what we think about, to those much has been given. Like, what are you expecting to be the given part? Like, if you were born into being Christian and you're born into our church, like, what else are you waiting to be given to you? Like, sometimes it's hard and you can't kind of give the blanket statements, but somewhere along the path, or even here together collectively, we get to taste some of, like, the sweetness, and we've had it. So you've been given that in addition to the fact that you're a Christian. And now, like, just go out and share it. And I think one of the things when I started early on, like in this church, I was always afraid of serving or always afraid of doing something. And Abuna Shoy was like, hey, if you keep holding yourself back, you kind of go stagnant, because where you see God and where you get to know Him is when you go out and where you do things and where you really put yourself out on the line. You feel a little uncomfortable, and then you kind of feel like that very odd hand that you never felt before lift you up, and then 1 and 1 makes 2. That was Jesus who was there with me, and it's just kind of like go now. Like I kind of just feel like every message I've been getting is like, go now, regardless of how uncomfortable and whatever it may be, go. Like I feel like these are urgent times. And just kind of like the way the world is going, the way things are going, like these are urgent times where we really shouldn't be holding on to what we have, but to really just go out there and like one right after the other to go out and to share it.
And there's so much work to be done here. Like you said, it doesn't have to be Africa. I mean, I'm sure if I haven't been to the city or DC, whatever you call it, if you just take a walk around, I'm sure you'll see loads of things that need doing, like loads of people who need somebody to help them out, like people who are hooked on drugs or people who are hooked on like seeking people's approval. Things like there's loads of things that like loads of people who need help. But we just feel that, oh, who am I? Somebody else will do it. That's not what God wants.
I think it's also important that we remember that when we carry the title Christianity, it's a lifestyle. It's not a part of who you are, it is who you are. It should be your entity. And in everything else, you should incorporate that. And it's so difficult to do when you're around non-Christian people or when you're in a secular world or secular kind of environment and you kind of have to hold on to your beliefs and not really impose them on anybody else. But at the same time, you should have, it should just be an example. You should stick out. And I can be honest, like personally, I don't like, I used to always have a really hard time always being different from my friends, always having them all agree on something and I'd be the one that says, no, I don't believe that. And it was really difficult at first and it used to bother me a lot, but then I realized that this is, if I'm not sticking out, then I'm not doing something right. And if I'm trying to seek people's approval, then I'm not seeking God's. And what benefit if the whole world says, good job, you're doing something right, and God's just, turning his back on me, and then there's no point really in carrying that Christian title. And I also think it's a big responsibility that when we are encountering people every day, a lot of people don't know who Christianity is, and we're faced with so many different religions and different cults in the world, and people don't really have any kind of foundation. People just kind of like to be spiritual or just like to have their own belief or make their own God to kind of fit their life and their lifestyle. And if we can just kind of realize that when you encounter this person, you are presenting Christ to them, and it is so important that you don't turn them off from Christ, because if you do, that's a big, that's a big responsibility for you to hold, before God. So.
About what you were saying about being different, I read a story a while back, because every now and then I wonder, am I being too serious in following God and stuff like that, or am I too different from other people? And it was a lovely story. It was talking about a priest who was friends with this big business guy, and they used to go play golf together, and they'd spend the weekends doing activities together and just eating together and enjoying each other's company. So this rich businessman became very sick, and he was on his deathbed. And he called his wife, and he was like, oh, Mrs. Businessman, come here. He's like, I need someone to come and pray for me. She's like, oh, I'll get your priest friend. And he said, no. There's this poor guy who works for me in the kitchen. He was a very rich man. And he's been really honest all of his life, and I can see God in his life. I want him to come and pray for me. And the guy who was talking about in the story was saying that sometimes people will treat, people appear to be more accepting of those who kind of go with the flow and adapt to society, but actually if you look deep in their hearts, the people that they look up to, the people who they would turn to in a problem, are the ones who are sticking to what they believe in and are not afraid to be different, not afraid to stick with God. So never be discouraged by the way that society treats you, or Would you guys maybe like to pray for each other? Like we could pray in groups of 2, girls with girls and boys with boys, about like things that are on your hearts, issues that are on your hearts.
Sure.
Problems you're facing, dreams you have for God, dreams you have for yourself. Yeah?
Yeah.
How many guys have we got? We got equal numbers. If there aren't equal numbers of guys, we can do it in 3. Yeah? So just spend some time, like share with each other things that are on your heart. Like, oh, my quiet time's really dry. I'm not really paying attention to God recently, or I'm not really, like I'm going through the motions, but it's not really. Or God, life with God's going great, but I don't know what God wants me to do. Stuff like that. Or exams or whatever. I'm not, okay, English people are not allowed to go with English people.
Okay, we can go advice next year.
Yeah.
Like, just make life a bit easier.